Good evening. I know the weather's nasty, and so that will probably affect. You're nasty too? You said we are too, is what I heard, but I thought maybe that you were referring to being. I was like, you're not nasty. Y'all are lovely people. Weather's nasty outside, so we may be. This may be the remnant. We studied that in the Old Testament, the faithful remnant come together. Good to be with you. As always, there's a chance to pray for folks over here at the prayer station. A basket in the back where you can invest in the ministries of this place. And we're glad that you're here. Questions before we get rolling into the conversation? Things everybody needs to know. Anybody need to say something that needs to be heard by the totality of the gathering? No? Last week we were deeply... Yes, ma'am? What's that? Thank you. We needed the rain, right? That's a very good thing. Yep. What's that? Nathan, I know. I wish he was here weekly. That'd be a lot of fun. We'd do like duets together. I mean, he would sing and I would lip sing. It would be fantastic. It's a kind of duet, right? It's a kind of duet. Hope you enjoyed. We had Nathan here last week. Bishop Nathan was great. It was a great time together. Because of that, I thought I would definitely back up and do some of the stuff that we did 4 chapters in 20 minutes last time. We'll do it a chance tonight to catch up on some of that if I didn't cruise through it with too much speed there. And then we'll do 9, 10, and 11, I think is our assign for tonight. Nathan was great, huge blessing. That tells folks afterwards that his laughter is like a whole sermon. Just the sound of it's just filled with the Spirit. It was a blessing to have a part of. So I hope it was a blessing to your life as well. Anything else before we get rolling? All right, let's pray. God, we thank you for tonight, for a chance to grow in your grace, to learn a bit more about who you are, what you've done, to get eyes to see and ears to hear. We thank you for rain that renews, and pray for safety of all those who navigate this storm tonight and the storms of our life, that you would guide us to the places that you call us, that we might be servants and sent people in your mission. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so we last week went really quickly through those chapters. So anything that was left from chapters 5 through 8 that lingered for you that we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, I don't want to blow through those without... Yes, sir. Sorry, it's hard for me to see. Right, so, and this whole section is really interesting, the blessings and talking about emails. Her argument is that all kinds of vocations, that we're all called to do work, and all work, short of being immoral, meaning the work itself is by definition toxic or destructive for those who do it, or for those who are around it, or for those who are affected by it. We could think in terms of like human trafficking, things like that. That's work, but it's by its very definition corrosive to human dignity and life, even if it's how you get your money. That's not a valid excuse. But everything else, she says, which I think is right, can be a valid form of really doing a type of ministry. Let's see. So if you're a coach or a teacher or a physician or an accountant or a fire, then any of those things that you're pursuing can be reflective of God's mission, can be done in a way that reflect being a baptized member of God's mission. Yes, sir. Sure. So if you're a lab technician and you're working on stuff, there's ways to do that. So that would be reflective. And then doing something, I'm getting really echoey there, maybe I'll back up. Doing something really well and doing something with integrity reflect who we are, whether that particular, like she's talking about email, whether that task itself is in any way inherently communally building or sanctifying or anything like that. So yeah, someone doing research in a lab, someone working alone at a computer writing or researching or whatever can in fact be a part of God's mission in the world, if that person is doing that work intentionally reflecting who they are in God's economy. That's what I mean. I'm with her on that. I do think it's worth further study, and if you want to not wait for us to do a series on it or something, Tim Keller has a great book called Every Good Endeavor. I think it's the name of the book, and it's about work from a Christian perspective. It's really interesting, sort of the notion that, and part of that, I think one of his opening chapters, he points out something I should have known, that work comes before the fall. I don't know about what your conception of work was, but for a long time, mine was that work was a byproduct of the fallen nature of the world. It's the reason we had to work. Why I had to mow the lawn. It's why I had to, work that job, whatever it was, because the world wasn't perfect, and so I needed some money to navigate it. But work comes before the fall. Now, we get twisted relationships and concepts about how work relates to us, but there is a calling for Christians to do work well, to show up in work environments well. That can be part of God's mission, whether or not you're preaching or just doing your job really well. Yes, sir. Yep. His question is, will there be work in the new heaven and new earth? And I think yes. I think that's the witness of Revelation, that we work. Now, I'm out of a job. So I'm going to have to learn how to do something else, which I might have limited skills, so I'll need some time. But no, I think that's exactly the point. Now, this is work that is stripped away of work done that's mindless and unnecessary, work that is unfruitful and untalked, work that corrodes your self-worth. This is like doing the work that you're built to do. So when I say work, I don't mean you're going to need a pay stub. I mean there are things to do. There is work to achieve in the resurrected life, it seems to me, in the text. I don't know if I can totally adequately describe that, but again, I go back to if, with our option 1, 2, and 3 sort of construct, if option 3 is the biblical witness, that is, heaven and earth are meant to be combined, and the culmination is this harmony restored, then the best moments of labor and effort in this life reflect, at least suggest, what work will look like in the resurrected life to come. And I'm thinking things like, I don't know, when you finish something, the feeling of accomplishment that comes from like, I actually got this thing done, or you plant a tree, or that kind of good fatigue that comes because you did actual labor. I don't know how else to kind of dig into that, if that's helpful to you or not. I take it as good news that there's work, because again, I go back to my initial concern about heaven was that it lasted a really long time and consisted of the 11 o'clock traditional service at Lakewood United Methodist Church, which were lovely. There still are lovely people, but it just seemed like a really long time to go to a traditional worship service because it was forever, which seems like a long time. But work, food, community, in their most redeemed and purest sense, seem to be retained as a part of the resurrected life to come in my reading of it. There's a hand. Yes, ma'am. Yep. So the other weird thing about, I shouldn't say weird. It's striking to me is one of the jobs, it's clear, is if you go back to the original job, where they had before the fall, was to take care of each other and take care of creation as sort of God's regents on earth. The restoration of that's spoken of in the revelatory sort of redemptive arc of Revelation and the Gospels for that matter, which is to say, and Paul mentions this when he says in Corinthians when they're fighting with each other and going to court, he says, don't you know you'll be the judge of the world, and you can't even arbitrate between yourselves when somebody's owed something in your community. So there's we don't talk this way much now, but our forebears in the faith would have heard much more mention and sung about the reigning and ruling of God's people over a renewed creation, which goes to, I think, the Isaiah reference that you're making, the work, justice being taken care of and provided for, beauty, truth, those kind of things, making sure they happen, and caretaking the creation we've been entrusted with. Awesome. Great questions. And great page references. Page 99, page 101. It's like everybody in the room's like, well, those folks did their reading. So you totally got them. If those are the only pages you read, you nailed it. Way to go. Well done. We didn't talk about it in the evening class. We spent a bit of time with it in the morning. I love the notion that the Christian life is lived between D-Day and VE Day, right? And I don't know if that, for non-historical nerds like myself, I don't know if that lands the same. So is it June, first week of June 6th, something like that's D-Day? And that maybe it's June 5th. I may be off. Is it 6th? Okay, well, close enough. It is the day the Allies are on the beach in the north of France. And while it isn't necessarily always the case, there's a pretty good consensus by the time that happens, Germany's days are over. I mean, there's lots of fighting that takes place. In fact, this week I was over at the JCC to see the Holocaust Museum and memorial there. So just seeing what happened in that last year of the war is just terrible and catastrophic. There's lots of bad things that happened, lots of battles that were fought, lots of people who were lost. But the outcome was pretty much established once the beachhead is gained. And yet the victory is still, a year away-ish? Somebody that knows their World War II history better than me could probably say, but it's about a year, roughly, before the surrender in Europe. So that notion of the time is drawing short for the forces of evil who are fighting against this advance of hope, and yet they still fight, which is our experience, isn't it? Like, that's the experience of life, that the forces of evil, though defeated, still fight. There's still casualties in this of people who find themselves consumed with cynicism or brokenness or pain or woundedness of this world, whether self-inflicted or other-inflicted, right? This is part of what we experience. And that seems to capture sort of what the New Testament, the both now and not yet, right? Yes, and then there's still more, kind of that space that's in the New Testament around Jesus has come, the victory is won, and yet there is the final fulfillment yet to be, and we live in that span of time. And I'm sure there were folks even there on the march that kind of thought, well, maybe we're never going to get to Germany. Maybe Germany will never fall. And it's easy to think, I think, the forces of evil and pain and brokenness and death itself that still hold parts of the territory of this earth seem like maybe they won't fall. And there's about it's by the wintertime, so 6 months in, you get the Battle of the Bulge, where it looked like, oh no, there's this counter-assault, which what we know now is it was the last gasp of a resource-strapped, just dying empire. But that wasn't what everybody thought when it happened. They didn't know. They thought this is bad news. They're going to push us back, kind of thing. So there are moments like that, I think, that fit that narrative, if that makes sense to you. Yeah. Her time discussion amuses me because I'm always amused at people's conversation around time. We made good time. And I always want to be like, no, you didn't. That's the one thing I know you didn't make. Right? You may have been very fast on your journey, but you can't make time. Kind of the old classic is that in churches, like, money is a really odd thing to talk about. I don't mind talking about money at all. You can go make more of that. You can't make a single hour, Scripture says, which is true. So asking you to give your time is a far more precious resource, whether we realize it or not. And so the marking of time and how we measure it is really interesting. Daylight savings time is hysterical to me. Like, we will say when it's light outside, right? Right? We move it around. And now it's like the savings time, which is supposed to be the abnormal time, is actually 65% of the year now. They changed the time right, where it's most of the year is actually the alternative time frame. That doesn't seem right at all to me. But that's neither here nor there, I guess. And folks on the equator don't know we keep messing with the days, right? It's pretty even. That's an axis joke. It doesn't really work in here. All right. So time and how we measure it, and then we think we control things that we can measure. I think that's an interesting notion. If we can measure it, we think we understand it, we think we control it. I'm sure in whatever industry you're in, right now, data and quantifiability is a huge thing. And I'm not against those things. There's lots of numbers I want to know. But the notion that somehow, because we can count something or measure something, we both understand it and can control it is a really, really favored lie we tell ourselves. It isn't true. At least in my notion. And so the church's work we don't do all the stuff she talked about. They're a much more liturgical kind of community than we are. But the church's work in things like Lent and Easter, Advent and Christmas, to sort of push against time structures that are different. It's the current rabbi in England, the head rabbi in London, or the one before, when they asked him the greatest cultural contribution of the Jews, you know what his answer was? Anybody know? It's a great answer. The weekend. It's a tremendous answer and true, right? The weekend. Do you like the weekend? I mean, I know like the 40-hour movement happened in different countries, labor. I'm all for all those things. Well, we have Labor Day. But the idea of there's a day that we don't work is an amazing notion when you think about it. It seems utterly inefficient, except it turns out it's not. And it was given to these former slaves walking out of Egypt. And the voice comes, we have all these rules, and one of the most important rule is 1 day a week you don't work. Imagine what that sounded like to people who died of old age and hard labor at 40. What it sounded like to the message to say 1 day a week, don't work. Breathe. And know that you are not the master of all things. So that has to do with time, but also, I guess, the later chapter with the rest. Anything else on time? I think time's interesting. The science, you take science in college. I took physics. I thought it was the most interesting. If you're bio or chemist folks, then bless you. But I like the wonder that physics seems to instill in people, even those that tend to be outside of maybe faith communities. And talked about it in other settings. I don't know if you've heard this before, then enjoy the rerun. And so I was at my first church assignment. There was a retired physics professor that I went to go visit, and he was ancient of days. I don't know how else to say it. He was not a young man. And we would talk. And he said when he was a PhD student, he remembers like staying up all night. He couldn't sleep. And he couldn't figure out when it was. Which is a graduate student thing to lose your mind about. But he couldn't figure out when it was. And he went to his supervising professor and says, Dr. whoever, Einstein, whatever. When is it? And the professor kind of like, what are you talking about? And he says, well, as soon as I mark a moment, it is the past. And I try to say about a moment that it's coming, it's in the future, it is not then. But as soon as I try to label the now, I can't find a place where I can mark and hold and say that is when it is. And you see the problem. The physics professor, he said he got kind of an odd look on his face and goes, listen, you're fishing in waters you don't have a license for. Which you've hung out with academics means two things. One, you don't have a PhD, so I don't have to answer you. And two, I don't know. Generally what that means. And I said, and so he stops the story, and I go, okay, but when is it? Like now I'm unsettled, like I don't know what to say. And he said, in just perfect sort of reflective, he said, the universe and our experience of it is far more mysterious and interesting than we even have begun to understand or pretend to know. And so the notion of time and how, it seems our observation of time, this is the relativity with Einstein, how fast things move seem to, they exchange that experience time. There's probably a sermon in that too that I'm not smart enough to give, but I thought her talking about the need for a time that's unhurried and liturgy being a gift of that's really good, which is related to Sabbath, which we'll get to in a second. Any more thoughts on 5 through 8 before we get on to 9? All right, do you have a friend, and if you think of them right now, that is something like Rebecca? So if you didn't get the chapter, she says, I have this friend Rebecca who is the person I call. And they got to the point where they're so close that she'll just call and give her a voice message. I love that notion. Kids are down, everything's cleaned up. She just calls up and lays it on her for like 5 minutes on a message and then hangs up, right? And then she'll hear the message. Do you have a friend like that in your life? And what makes them that kind of friend rather than everybody else that you have in your life? What makes the Rebecca relationships happen in our life? Trust. Excellent answer. It's true. Time. Dependability. Of them. Yeah, not us. We can be just as flaky as we want to be, but they got to be dependable, right? Shared experiences. Excellent. Shared faith and shared values. Yeah. All right. Huh? Common. No judgment. You have really good friends. They're not judging you. What? Truth. Right. So in the morning session, there was somebody offered, a gentleman, that women tend to have Rebeccas as friends, but men don't really have many of them. And everybody was like, there's a mostly female crowd in the morning, majority. And then they kind of said, well, yeah, everything that's true. And he said, because it's really easy for them. And then he lost them. That's right. Like they turned on him pretty quick. They were with him for a while. Yeah, women have more. And like, easy. No, it's not easy. It's hard work. People talk about that. And so people have mentioned the traits of these people. Is it a valuable thing in your life? So why don't people have more of these? If it's so good, why don't we have more of this? Because trust is hard. It's risky. Takes a long time. So it demands time, demands work, and vulnerability. What are we pretty in short supply on? Time, trust, and vulnerability. I mean, we got into the conversation around gender, and it cuts a lot of different ways cultural. I'll just say this. In at least general trends and stereotypes, not all of which are gone, women are allowed to have a lot of emotions, save for two. And men are allowed to have two emotions and none of the rest. And if you're having trouble unlocking what I'm saying here, we have lots of names for women who have those two emotions. Because generally that's how things get played out, right? When they're socially unequal. Are you with me? Right? And so I think part of the reason women are open, at least in these relationships, is vulnerability is at least permitted in some forms where it's not for men. So someone raises their hand in this conversation and they go, you know what? The first time I ever saw another grown man cry was when I went to a walk to Emmaus. Right? Why? Because it's a container in which it's okay. When the message are culturally that for the decades you don't ever show weakness or softness at all, that's a flaw. Right? It's a failing. Think about that for a moment. And by the way, I've never, ever in my life, I've met a lot of them, I've never met a man for which vulnerability and woundedness weren't true, weren't a part of the story. They don't, not on the outside, because we're not allowed to do that, but once you get to know them every single time, all the time, that's there. In different measures and everything else. I'm not trying to put everybody in the same box. I said it only to say that cultural pressure, that current that pushes against us, steals from us, men and women, steals from us relationships that we need, relationships that we're built to have. If we're right about who God is, that God in his very essence is a trinity, right? A relationally based 3-1, 1 and 3, a unity of relationships, then it may be that we made in the image of this deity are built to have relationships. And the fact that they're hard, messy, time-consuming, and we can be vulnerable to those things are reasons we might neglect it. But they're reasons that the brokenness of the world are stealing from us things we're meant to have. So we like to think that like sin is like our thing, and our wounds are ours, and yours are yours, and we live on these islands. Has anybody been in an airport recently? Did anybody notice that there was a long process for getting onto your airplane? Now, I'm looking around, I don't know all of you. So there may be some nefarious people among us. I don't think any of you have any intent to board an airplane and cause damage or terror to anyone. And look, I don't see anybody. There's a few in the church, but I don't think they're here tonight that I would be like, yes, you should probably pat them down. Right? I don't think that's not who you are, right? It's got nothing. You've never done that. You'll never do that. But when you go to the airport, they're going to check your bag. They're going to pat you down. They're going to ask you questions. You're going to lose your hairspray or your toothpaste because they're too big. You forgot that you were carrying on. That's right. Why? Because the ripple effects of broken choices by other people affect us every single day. We want to pretend like that's not true. And that same screening process that we see at an airport is the same kind of thing we do in relationships. Because we've been hurt, because we've been wounded, we develop similar screening programs that are even more strenuous to keep people from ever having the chance to do something that would cause us pain or terror. It's hard. And I wouldn't tell you not to be, as Scripture says, wise as serpents as we are gentle as doves. We want to do those things. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. The doves aren't wise. They're gentle. I think I said that right. Who knows? So you can be wise, but we also, I think, are ones who follow someone who is willing to be wounded for our sake. And in the end, either our wounds or his wounds will define our lives. And if our wounds do, then the defensive makes total sense. Why would we ever let somebody have access to those parts of ourselves that are raw? Now, I'm not asking you to do that at 9:30 service on Sunday when there's 500 people in this room. If you want to come down here and get the microphone and tell your story, have at it. I'll shorten the sermon so you can do that. But I don't know that people want to do that. It wouldn't be constructive, because what we do need to have is those containers in which relationship can happen. It's earned over time. Y'all said time. That's exactly right. Time, trust. Trust is hard to build, easy to break. It's like stained glass. Long time and expensive. One rock is all it takes to break it. Easy to break, hard to make. And beautiful when it's in place, right? Gorgeous. Yeah, all right. Enough about Rebecca. I don't know Rebecca, but she sounds lovely. We're built for community. We're made in the image of community. And sometimes those people are strange. I like the Newbegin quote on page 126. He's a Catholic theologian, actually, if I have it right. None of us can be made whole till we are made whole together. The healing that takes place is communal in nature. I know this runs against our sort of American thing that we're all on our own and we live on these islands. But the truth is, scripturally at least, people seem to be in community all the time, built for it and a part of that. And not like we think, oh, we're really close. Paul actually says we're made out of the same, we're a body of Christ knitted together. Like organs are related, which means the outcomes are connected. If I'm a spleen, which the doctor that gave me a hard time about spleens isn't here, and you're, a lungs, then our outcomes are pretty tied together. I realize that you can take a spleen out and people can live. Lungs are a little harder to go without, but we're in this part of the same body, and so it's not like, well, whatever happens with you, that happened to you. It's happening to me as well. We're all connected. Other community thoughts? Yeah, so I think I've talked about Vincent Donovan, who went to Tanzania. It was called Swaziland when he went. But he has a great quote about when he goes to these villages and he's sharing the gospel. The whole book's worth looking at, but shares the gospel. He got to where he really stripped it back. He's like, I'm just going to go and give this gospel to people, and those that want to be baptized and come to faith, I'm going to do it. We're going to train them up into faith. Well, he would go to these villages and he would teach, and say, okay, I want to invite, to make a decision, commit your life to Christ. He said, I'm going to come back tomorrow, and I want to talk to those folks that want to become Christians. So he leaves and comes back, and the chief, the leader of the community, says, okay, we believe, we will be baptized. And Donovan says, no. That's not how this works. I need to talk to everybody. This guy over here came to one of our meetings and was out hunting the whole time. She over there doesn't understand a word of what I'm talking about. And that person doesn't seem engaged at all. And the chief was like, why are you trying to divide us? The strong will help the weak. The smart will help the slow. And those that work hard will help the lazy. We believe and we will be baptized. Which I thought, that's a challenging notion for Western culture, in which the things that matter most are my own agency and decision making. I'm not saying that we should, commit whole villages here. I don't think the Chavano Park mayor, whether they're a member here or not, can make that decision for Chavano Park. But the notion of the communal nature of faith, I think, is reflected in other cultures in ways that are helpful. And it's like anything else, right? You don't see some of your own cultural stuff until you visit other places or have them visit you and talk about it. Yeah. Several references. She said that the New Testament makes it mention that somebody comes to faith and they were baptized, them and their whole household, which would include servants, children, whoever was in the household. Absolutely. Good point. Community. Makes us nervous. Why? Somebody this morning said, the reason it's hard is because then all of a sudden you're like responsible for this person and sometimes they're a mess. And I was like, that is the most honest answer I've ever, that's so true. The problem is sometimes I'm a mess, right? And you guys are probably all fine, but you know people who can be messes. And I think that responsibility word's are really interesting. I read an article this week, or maybe in the last week, and it was in a completely different, it wasn't religious in its scope, although it has religious implications, about how our country is a country of rebels, meaning that everybody in like our culture right now draws a narrative about themselves that they're in rebellion against the institution and the man. The problem is nobody's the man. Nobody right now claims to have institutional power. Right? So then you have, you can pick whoever your team you don't like is. So whether that's a politician or movie makers or social institution, whatever, you have people who are heads of these things talking as if they have no agency. It's a really interesting argument, right? They're not responsible. They're rebels. Rebels aren't responsible for groups. Rebels are just saying, I'm being either a victim or victimized, or I'm fighting for this cause, but there's no institutional or communal responsibility in that. So the argument of the article was, the real rebellion today is to be someone willing to take responsibility for what power and agency you do have. And not say it's somebody else that must, but I will. And I was like, oh, that's potent for the church, and that's potent for culture. And I wonder if that is the rebellion we could be about. Say, I'm going to be responsible for my own house. I'm going to be responsible for my block. I'm going to be responsible for my own choices and the outcomes that come from that choices, and the power I can use in my life to see outcomes for other people be positive. So I just thought it was interesting about responsibility and power. And if you go back to our Epic of Eden with some really interesting theological import. All right, chapter 10. Now, I've shared what I think about tea. I think tea, despite the really impressive marketing campaign, is wet dirt. She gets real close to confessing this when she says that her tea is hot water and dried leaves. And I was like, yeah, but if you mash the leaves into small pieces, what is it? Dirt. And that's what it is. So I don't think a ton of the base conversation, but I love the chapter. It's all about how some things worth doing take time to do. And beauty and appreciation are not the same thing as sloth. Right? Sloth is a sin. Sabbath is not a sin. In fact, Sabbath is a command. It's one of the top commands, to rest and see beauty. And I thought the argument that she has in there about how in a culture that is increasingly hostile to conversations about right and wrong, have you noticed this? The culture doesn't have a conversation about right and wrong, which is fascinating, by the way. The intensity around that conversation sort of belies the truth, doesn't it? So don't talk about right and wrong, but can talk about beauty. Right, so instead of leading with your life's wrong, let's talk about where's beauty happening, where in sort of cultivation of beauty, and be the people that are about supporting, calling out, and pointing to beauty because we believe in the author of beauty, that there's a source in this beauty, and that beauty leads to truth, and truth leads to God, because truth in its proper form is necessarily beautiful. I thought it was just an interesting sort of line of argument around that. So having tea or working on music or anything else is about beauty. And I thought it was lovely. I like coffee, not so much tea. But I was confessing this morning that as I've gotten older, the way I make coffee is faster and easier and not quite as good. Right. Like it's passable, but is like efficiency or beauty more important in my life? I don't know, it was a challenging chapter for me on that front. And I've shared with you, I think, it's been some time, so I know you all have your notes from my sermon 2 years ago. I don't believe that you do. But I have a certain infatuation with the Hot Pocket. You remember this conversation? Yeah, some of you are nodding. Okay. Well, I think Hot Pockets are rad. I would have not finished undergrad without Hot Pockets and ramen. And I'm fascinated, and I discovered this much later, that on the side of the Hot Pocket, there are directions for how to do a Hot Pocket in a conventional oven. Did you know this? It takes 1 hour and 5 minutes. I know. And so one day, I preheated the oven, 400 degrees. Put it on one of those trays, and I cooked my Hot Pocket in the oven. And I'm here to tell you, it was amazing. The crust actually tasted like bread. It was flaky. The inside, it didn't have the fire and ice thing. You know fire and ice? The cheese is boiling and the chicken is frozen solid. Like that's the part of the experience when you have the microwaved Hot Pocket. You know how many times I've done the conventional oven cooking of a Hot Pocket? I think my wife's already saying, one time. She was there. And I was like, taste this. Because if you have 1 hour and 5 minutes, who's choosing a Hot Pocket? Right, there's real food. That's an option. Who's doing it? It is better, but it's still a Hot Pocket. And the microwave, by the way, some of you are like, what's a Hot Pocket? It's a pocket of bread-ish filled with cheese-ish and meat-ish, and some vegetables, sort of, every once in a while, depending on the kind you want. It takes 90 seconds in the microwave. 90 seconds versus 1 hour and 5 minutes. Right? It's way better if you take your time. And that's with a Hot Pocket. So many other things that's true for, but we are so programmed that our value is rooted in efficiency and productivity. Another cultural marker for you. If you ask people from European cultures, like in the greeting, in initial meetings, they will generally get pretty quickly to where are you from? Right? What soil do you claim? If you're in an African culture, and Africa's not one country any more than Europe is, and there's variations, but they generally want to talk about who your people are. What do Americans ask within maybe 15 minutes of an encounter? What do you do? No one ever gets it wrong because we do it all the time. What do you do? Right? And isn't wrong, it's just something we should notice, that we place identity and value in our productivity and what we do. Now, I notice this probably more because I have a weird job. And when I get to that conversation, I used to just dread the moment when they would say, what do you do? And I had to tell them that I get paid to be a Jesus dude, and everybody would get weird, right? All of a sudden, I start apologizing for what they said on the fourth tee box, or like, the flight would get real long. We start talking about, what wounds the church has put upon them, and I'm there apologizing. I don't know this person, which is what's part of the gig. We should say, I'm sorry that happened at a church, because churches do bad things. It's just a weird job. And I realize how often initial encounters are so defined by what we do. How fast we can do it, how efficient we can be is right behind that. And so the invitation of this chapter I thought was really lovely to say, do we really want to shape our lives around these things, or would we rather be ordered around habits that generate beauty, calm, pleasure that is non-corrosive and destructive for ourselves and other? Right? Pleasure is God's idea. Even that word is almost stolen at this point. When I say it, you go, can you say pleasure in church? I just did. I may not have a job tomorrow, but I said it tonight. It's God's idea that things would be good. The garden is built to be good. All this goodness, it's the corrupted goodness that we're distorted by. So in relationships, in the previous chapter, and in our own interests, it's easy to see the sort of acids of our fallenness, both systemic in culture and in us. Any thoughts on beauty, tea making, coffee making, moments of reflection and rest? I loved in Lent that she inverted it. Her whole life was Lent. She just had a baby. You hear that phrase? The priest told her, your whole life's Lent. So I want you to go have like a little feast day, which is go read a book for pleasure, go drink a cup of coffee, go have a moment that's just you. That's what you're going to do for a discipline in Lent. Because we have seasons in which our whole life feels like Lent. Like Job doesn't need additional reminders of his, he doesn't need to be told from dust you're made to dust you'll return. He's like, yeah, I got that. Right? If you're in that season in your life, you don't need Ash Wednesday in the same way that the rest of us might that season. Thoughts on sanctuary and savoring things?
Where she says on page 136, it takes strength to enjoy the world and we must exercise muscle to revel. It was kind of sad.
So you thought it was, okay, yes, it's sad reflection, but I thought it was just a great bit of writing. She read 136, and it says, it takes strength to enjoy the world. It's first opened and closed paragraph on the book. To enjoy the world, we must exercise a kind of muscle to revel and delight. If we neglect exercising that muscle, if we never savor a lazy afternoon, we must always be cleaning out the fridge, or volunteering at the church, or clocking in more hours, we'll forget how to notice beauty, and we'll miss the unmistakable reality of goodness that pleasure trains us to see. We must take up the practice, the privilege and responsibility, there's that word again, of noticing, savoring, reveling, so that, to use Ann Dillard's phrase, creation need not play to an empty house. That's a fine paragraph right there. Anyway, that's good stuff. I like that a lot. Thank you. Good call. I love the notion of like things you work out get stronger, which is true for our minds, our hearts, our bodies, and our spirits. Right? They get stronger as we use them. She has a couple pages before. Chesterton's one of my favorite authors. And I should say this. One of the reasons I love this book, I think, which I didn't realize till like this second or third time through it, is that in some ways it's a love letter about ordinary places God shows up and how to reflect on that. In other ways, it's so clear to me that she loves the work of other writers. And so laced throughout her work is a reference to other words that she loves and those who have written them, which is lovely. Not all folks who are good with words are ready to share that glory with others. I don't know how else to say that. And I love that she does. Anyway, and so there's several authors in here that I just love, Chesterton being one of my favorites, with the great story about how we've grown old. We're older than our Father. Did you read that section? It's on page 132. It's one of my favorite sort of insights of his. He's just brilliant. And this guy's like turn of the last century. Right, so he's the guy Lewis is reading when he's coming to faith, trying to get his mind around Christianity. It's Chesterton from the 1900s, early 1900s. And Chesterton would have been awesome at Twitter, by the way. He'd been really good at that. So his conversations about how the repetition of a child and wonder may be the fact that why the sun comes up every day. And Chesterton was well aware that the sun was a ball of fire that the earth was spinning around to see again. But his point is that the again, I don't know if you've ever had a kid. I mean, that's a huge word for a kid. Do it again. If you throw a kid in the air, you better be prepared for throwing them in the air. And if you don't catch them, they won't ask you to do it again. But if you catch them and they enjoy it, you're going to get repetition of it again and again. They will again you and again you till you just can't take it anymore. Whatever that is. Again, again, again. Why? Because they are not dulled to the wonder. That was a line from last week, and she repeated it in a different way in the section right after what you were saying, the dull to the wonder around us. And Chesterton's argument is, perhaps God's not dull to it. Perhaps grass is green, because God has not gotten tired of how green looks on grass. Yeah? So his question is, when does an appreciation of these things, or when the again? Yeah. I think when becomes an issue, so I'll go to the appreciation. I think appreciation is when it folds from saying, "Isn't it beautiful how God's grace bounces off of this thing," to the thing being an end to itself. Right. So instead of a 300-year-old tree being something I'm just filled with awe and thanksgiving to be in the presence of, I now want to worship the tree. Right, that, and maybe I'm being overly sort of like directing that, but that's sort of the twist. Or beauty in the world, like you can have an artist that's into beauty, and then that beauty can become so consuming that it's no longer a reflection; it is now an object and an end to itself. So I think that's probably something to watch for. And then the again, I think is I guess your argument is obsessive-compulsive disorder can lead you to again and again and again in a way that can be corrosive. I think when it starts to rot, it no longer has joy, which OCD folks will tell you the joy is long gone in the hand washing, that goes over and over again. If the joy gets sapped out, and if the repetition then starts stealing from other things that are supposed to be taking place. So if you're still doing again, and so you miss out on like dinner or relationships or the things is you're only doing this one thing, and your world becomes that one thing. I think it's the difference between appreciation and becoming myopically focused on something. Like, well, I've seen you food, or I've seen you play golf. You have a beautiful swing, Maverick. So it's the difference between enjoying that and then not attending to your marriage because you play golf every day all the time, which I know you're not doing, because as in, I've seen your swing. But, he knows I'm messing with him. That it becomes the center, right? Something that should be secondary becomes primary, I think, is an issue. By the way, that's the nature of sin. All good things, so long as they are derivative things, can be good. It is those good things becoming primary things that are almost always destructive for us. And it's the good, even the best things that are twisted that have the most powerful for damage. Like humans have the most capacity to do damage. They also are the highest of things that God has made, at least on this planet. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful. And I think the lines on some of these things is where wisdom comes in, right? Wisdom is the living in the place where I cultivate an understanding of how to use my time. It isn't that I only have tea. I'm not going to have tea at all unless, it's a meaningful thing in our relationship to be, I'll drink tea with you, Maverick. And I've had tea that was passably good. Anyway, or always only having a cup of coffee. It's if the rest of our life chokes out the possibility to have that. So there's hedonism, which would be on the other side, where we only exist to have pleasure in any moment. And that means we don't do all the things that need doing that might be hard in that moment that are a part of what needs to happen, that we'd sacrifice for another thing. So that balance, or that discernment, I think, is the product of wisdom over time. In the same way that relationships are. That's what I would say. I love the chapter on sleep. I think I've told you that I require less sleep than my wife. But what I loved, I remember being like, she's here, but I remember, so just a warning. I remember being super concerned when we were pregnant with our first. Because I remember being afraid to wake her up. And not because she would be violent, but I didn't want to do that. I was scared. And then thinking, what's going to happen when we have this baby that I'm told at least that they wake up all the time? She says, you can tell what you love by what you're willing to lose sleep for. I loved that notion. And so it doesn't have to be a kid. It could be anything. Like, what friend would you be like, okay, we're staying up to midnight because this time is just precious? It's because you love your friend. Or maybe there's a certain trip or a certain meal. Like, there's love in saying, if you do that every night, obviously there's negative consequences of not sleeping. But I love that notion because I've always been fond of, if you show me, you don't have to, but if you show me your calendar and your checkbook, we can sit down, we can figure out what you value. How do you spend your time? You could have all kinds of stories, we all do, about who we are and what we're about. But if you look at your calendar and you look at where your money goes, that's who you are. And you add in who'd you leave sleep for, it gives a nice little picture of that. And so where does our money go? Where does our time go? And what are we willing to sacrifice for, including something as basic as sleep? I thought was lovely. And so she says, I don't consciously decide, and this hit home for me, I don't know if you read it, Holly, that we're watching a show and that says, we're going to watch one more episode. I don't think, this show is more important than my body, than my relationships, and than my work. And yet implicitly, we choose to watch the show, right? Do y'all watch these streaming shows? So one of the ones that I'm particularly connected to, if you watch 2 or 3 episodes with nothing happening or changing anything, this super judgy screen comes up. And it says, are you still watching? You've seen it. Good. Okay, I'm not the only one. And I was going to go to bed, but there's this weird 12-year-old boy still within me that says, well, since you asked, I'm going to watch one more. Because you're not the boss of me, which is so asinine and stupid, I know. But I can't wait to mash the button and be like, yeah, I'm still watching the show. Wish I could go to bed now. Think about maturity around sleep, though. And think about going back to Sabbath and rest. It's one of the most interesting things to watch as people develop children is the animosity and fight. We had a car wreck in the hallway somehow. Animosity and fight against sleep. Have you watched this? Or puppies will do this. Have you seen it? Like when you're just like, go to sleep. Like what is the problem? There's nothing, there's not a mark of immaturity, an inability to accept the need for rest, which sounds super wise until I realize it's still true in my life that I fight against it, not because I'm arguing with Netflix or whatever, but because in my own life, sometimes I'll say, well, I don't need to rest. I can do this, I can do that, and think about that is a sure sign of a place in which maturity is still happening in our life, that we would rest. And I left thinking, what if Christians were known as the people who not only gave witness to truth, but also promoted and pointed at beauty wherever it showed up, and were the calmest, most rested people in our culture. Talk about a rebellion. Calmest and rested. We need less anxious people everywhere in this country right now. Less anxious, less externally wired up by the world. And to do that, I think we got to rest. And that's hard to rest when we think we are what we do. And it's hard to do that when we think that time is something that we can control and measure in a way that will control it. And I thought this whole kind of sweep of the chapters was just it's a challenge for me. I don't know how you felt about it. It was a challenge to me to sort of reflect on that, who I am in God rather than who I perform to be in life. And rest and other things are a big part of that. And rest isn't just sleep, but that's certainly a part of it. And children fight it. I mean, do you know in the preschool that nap time is a battleground? I want you for a moment, I'm looking around, I want you for a moment to think that your boss came to you and said, I'm really going to need you to spend an hour and a half napping this afternoon. The whole stake of the company is at stake and you getting a solid nap this afternoon. Can you imagine if that was an assignment in your life? Right, it's the greatest thing I've ever heard. No one, and then I find myself arguing with children, like, take a nap. And I'm like, you know what I would give for anyone to tell me, take a nap? Except it's in the big book that I read all the time. Rest. Rest. Over and over again. It's one of the top rules. Take a rest and a break. So I hope that gets to yours. I go back to, I'll go where, unless there's thoughts on rest time. Anybody got stuff? So I offered airports as a place where sin, the ripple of that, is seen. There's other things that we can see that are really interesting in an airport. People are really interesting animals, aren't they? Right? As a reflection of what's going on, you watch them at this deals. I also like airports as a notion around the mission of the church. Because an airport is never an end to itself. And yes, I saw the Tom Hanks movie where he couldn't leave. He's from some fake country that no longer existed when he got off the plane. And so, have you seen it? You don't have to watch it. I mean, there are better Tom Hanks movies, like Big and Saving Private Ryan. I mean, whatever. I don't have like a ranking order, but this would be not at the top of Tom Hanks films. But sort of that is a kind of a side note exemption. But really, when you go to the airport, you're going somewhere else. That's Sunday mornings. We have really for a long time sold the church as a destination, when it really is a launching into the place that you're supposed to get to. And I don't necessarily mean just heaven, although I believe that too. It is a place where you can get refueled. It's a place where you can get fed. It's a place where you can get a souvenir or two to take with you to bless others wherever you're going. I hope that happens, whether it's a word or an item. But it's a launching pad where you're going. And this morning I'm talking about this, and the guy goes, yeah, but then why do they call it a terminal? Literally happened. I don't know. I think it's because your journey's over, but I don't know what the derivation of terminus is. But airports are not places that you live. Right? Neither is really this church. It's places that you come to get where you're supposed to go in our journey together on the work that God's called us to. And so I think that's an interesting notion for us as we think about finding the place in which God shows up in an ordinary place, whether you're in an airport or you're working or you're in the garden, looking for ways in which God might be showing up, or you're resting or having a cup of coffee or you're calling your friend. So I do like her practices. One of the things she said for chapter 9 is if there's a friend in your life, to call them. My thing is, if you've got someone who's been Rebecca for you, it's a great week if you can to thank them. Just give them a call, write them a note, say thanks for being the person I can talk to, I can call. It matters in my life that you can do that. So I remember in the back of the book she has tasks. It also says if you don't know your pastor, go introduce yourself. Feel free. I've met many of you, and most of you I like a lot. The rest of you I like even more than that. I didn't mean to suggest there are people I don't like that. You're all great. So meet your pastor, and there's some other tasks in there too. Yeah, any thoughts on those chapters or any more airport reflections that are necessary? By the way, my favorite thing in any airport ever is in the Miami International Airport. Have you been there? Well, they have built these things. They're like courtyards, but when you're walking to the terminal, they don't look like it. They're smoking sections. And so we were changing a plane. I think it was a flight back from Africa and from Kenya. And so we were in Miami, and you walk through the terminal, and it's like plexiglassed in, but it's external to the outside. But the experience of being in the terminal is like it's like you're at the zoo, and they've caged the smokers. And so you're walking to the thing. If you've seen it, like it's the only thing. I mean, like you bring the kids, and you're like, look. Yeah, he's smoking. Like, let's see if we can get him. Like, I wonder when they feed them. We'll come back and watch them feed. Just the bizarrest thing, which I don't know why I thought of that, but that's just an interesting thing in an airport. Yeah, and I don't have a big issue with smoking either way, but that's sort of assigned to a box there in the airport. Other observations, other places that you are amused in life or airports? Resting, tea, coffee, savoring, Sabbath. I get everything? I have to pause you and say, I think we can all agree she gets 25 Jesus points for her page reference. You got 20, you got it. Okay, go ahead. She makes a point, 151. Good.
It's hard for us to believe that God is at work in us and in the world when we're not asleep. And it reveals who we truly think is the mover and shaker of our lives.
So if you couldn't hear her, she's in the second full paragraph. It's hard to believe that God is at work in us and the world even while we sleep. It reveals who we truly think is the mover and maker of our lives and spiritual health. This is the wisdom of Sabbath and sleep. It is this, that it invites us to realize that the world is not something we've made. Remember creation, and then God rested. And that's both because all of the enemies of God are defeated, and he is Lord over that which he surveys. But also in that rest, the invitation is, we don't have to make everything happen. The good stuff that happens is already here to be cultivated, not because we generate it. Rest reminds us that there are things that are going to happen that we don't do. And that in the end, God is sovereign over this world and creation in our lives. And the word I have in that is, and hope it's helpful to you, you will die with things left undone on your list of things to do. Like people have bucket lists now. If you're still alive, you should be adding things to it, and you won't get to all of it. That's okay. There may be emails unanswered in your inbox when you die. That's okay. There'll be things left undone. You don't have to do all of these things. Now, I do. I have to finish all of these things and get them done. And my wife's shaking her head because she knows exactly. I've probably never been more of a hypocrite than telling other people to relax and not work hard. But it's true, and it's true for me too. It is not up to us to create creation or to finish it. Our job is to steward it, and that's a different job. And stewards get to rest. Stewards ought to rest, because we are not the ultimate movers and shakers in our own life, and God can work in and through us even when we're sleeping. Thoughts, reflections. I believe the weather has changed drastically because it's lighter in here than it was this afternoon right now through the windows. So you may have a nice dry ride home. What's that? Let's get her here. I'll reach out to her and see if we can't get her for an event. It'd be great to have her come down. So if you loved it, I'm glad. If you didn't, it's over. And what we're going to do next week, there's no morning AM. So I know a couple of you float around between the two classes, but there's no AM class next week. I will be with my parents. It's their 50th wedding anniversary. And so I'm going to spend some time with them. Thank you. You should clap for them to stay 50 years and had me. I mean, like, that's the double challenge there is tough. But they're good folks, so we're going to hang out with them. And in the evening, Pastor Holly will be here to share with you, or anybody else who can get to come with you, some of the findings of our mental health survey that we did, I want to say about 4 or 6 months ago. It was last year. And a whole bunch, there's a couple hopes out of that. Then it won't be the last time you hear about it, but it'll be the first sort of thing she's talking to a group. She wants to talk to this group of very smart people and answer questions. Couple things. I think we had 400 or so responses to this survey. And here's a couple things. No one generally, I say no one, very few people feel shame if they come here and say they have a cancer or they have arthritis or they're battling lupus. They tell us that all the time. Physical health, we know we should care for each other. When it comes to mental health, people seem to think it needs to be a secret, and they think they're the only one. Now, it wasn't a scientific polling, but we have 400-something things. I'm going to tell you, if you have battled addiction, mental illness around like depression, if abuse has been known in your family system, whether physical or sexual, ADHD came up a bunch, several things that were incredibly common in the sample size we have. Now, 400 people is not the whole congregation. I'm just telling you, you're not alone. And so one of the things we want to peel away is the notion that somehow there's shame and stigma attached to being able to say that we're good news people who want to be a part of not only physical health and well-being, but also spiritual and mental health. And that it's okay to say, I battle anxiety or depression, and how can we have groups and ministries in response to those things, and the professional partners that we need to have, just like we have professional partners that help people deal with cancer. We don't do cancer treatments here, but we do pray a ton with cancer folks, right? Cancer folks, that's not what you want. Like, who are you? I'm a cancer folk. No one's a cancer folk, I'm sorry. It's not an identity, it's a diagnosis. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. But you get the idea. And really, folks have not, the church, this is the thing that I apologize for, we have not done a good enough job of making space, especially given the numbers we got back around particularly abuse and addiction in our midst. Either the person giving the thing or somebody in their family, spouse, child, or parent. Really significant numbers of people here. And so we need to find a way to make that okay to talk about. So she's going to talk about that some. I think it'll be a great time of reflecting on who we are and how we bring health and wholeness. And we'll do some things later in the fall in response to that. And then on the 9th, which is the next Wednesday, we will begin Philippians. And we're going to do Philippians 1, 2, 3, and 4. Which will get us to the end of May and the end of Wednesday nights. Actually, in the summer, we don't have Wednesday the 29th. Is that the right Wednesday? Will be the last 2nd, 9th, 16th. Did I get that right? 30th. Is that right? 30th? Whatever the last Wednesday is. That'll be it's the 30th. The last Wednesday. Is it on the sheet? Sources close to you are confirming on the yellow sheet. It's the 30th. Will be the last one in Philippians 4. And in those, if you haven't done the kind of Bible studies with us, we just do verse by verse. Read through, talk about it, read through, talk about it. I'm going to read out of Tom Wright. I know you're all shocked. N.T. Wright's translation in the prison letter book. So it's got Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon, 4 letters that Paul writes from prison. That sort of frames it, doesn't it? As to a letter about joy that's written from prison. You don't have to have this. If you have a Bible, I'm going to wager Philippians is in it. I don't know a group for which it's not canonical. I think it is for everybody. And I would, hazard that you can get through each of those chapters each week. So not a big demanding thing. He does have commentary in here if you want to see it. We will have these books if you want it, but it is not required. Philippians is a great book. August the 29th, 29th is the Wednesday. I know the Sundays. That's why I have to do the counting. August 26th, the Wednesday is the 29th, is our first Sunday back in the fall. And short of some alteration, we're going to do a gospel like this. Just go through a chapter a week, maybe 2 chapters some weeks, depending on the gospel. Between that and getting to the Advent season and Christmas in the fall. So that's the plan. I did discuss what I've done in previous places, and it may not be something that's super interesting to folks here. I think we'll try one. Is I've done in the summer, I've tried to do a Bible study in the summer, but the schedule of life is just difficult. And if like you're in Romans and you miss 4 chapters, it's kind of hard to catch up. It's hard to do Romans, period. But I was naive in 25, and I thought we should all do Romans together. And then by the end, there were 4 of us left. It was a special time for the 4 of us. And I wasn't one of them. I left. I quit. But the 4 of them said it was a really good end. But kidding. I went to the end. So I don't do those kind of things in the summer. Really, just the pattern doesn't work. But what I have done is do books that we all read before that session and do like one a month kind of thing at times. I think maybe we'll just do one this summer to see how it goes. And I've done a range of things from clearly religious texts like The Great Divorce, which is C.S. Lewis, or Life Together, Bonhoeffer, classic works like, what have we done? Count of Monte Cristo, because there's a movie. The book's wonderful, but there's pretty people in the movie, so people prefer that sometimes, which is nice. People read the book, and then we talk about like, okay, as people who are good news people, kind of like with tea or anything else, how do we read a book like this, and what are the themes in it, whether the author intends them or not, and sometimes they absolutely do. Religious themes, religious reflections. We've done things like Hunger Games, when that was a big deal, because it was cool to see like grandparents reading with their grandkids and having a conversation about, okay, what do we do as good news people talk about a book about young people being put in a place to die for our entertainment, which sounds completely foreign, except I'm a huge fan of football. And we have one here that does research in this area, so I won't put him on the spot, but like there's some pretty solid research emerging that it's not really good for your health long term. And that's different than the Hunger Games, but it's not too far off from the gladiators. Fight for entertainment, and you might survive, but you might not. And so what does that mean? Anyway, so reflects like that. So The Shack was one we did a long time ago. That came out like 10 years ago, and a conversation around that. So if that's interesting to y'all, I'll get the book out soon so we can all read it. I tend to pick ones that has movies if they're big, long, old books, because not everybody wants to read the books. I don't know why everybody doesn't want to read, Victor Hugo for 1,500 pages, or with us, 100 pages on the Paris subway system within it. But Les Mis is a pretty good book. I contend, actually, in those 1,500 pages is trapped the greatest 500-page novel of all time. If only an editor could have got it to 500 pages, it would be there would be no debate. It would be the greatest book ever written. At its current state, it's really, really, really good. But man, are there just sections like, what are you talking about, Victor? He doesn't call back when I say that. But anyway, so I think it's an interesting way to get it, kind of thinking in terms that are biblically rooted and as people of faith around works of popular culture and or historic fiction. So that's interesting. We may try to do that. I like to enjoy that, but it's not always the case with folks, so we'll see. If you have thoughts on that or books you'd like to suggest, I would love to hear about those for maybe a July Sunday evening maybe, or a Wednesday evening in the summer, depending on how schedules work out. Questions, thoughts? I'm sorry that the weather either the weather or this book drove a lot of people away tonight. So if you're watching online from the weather, I'm glad that you were a part of it. And we'll do different things from this from time to time. But I knew for some folks, this book's a revelation, I think. It just is, and I just really enjoy the reminder to look for God in all of these different ways, especially on the heel of all of our option 1, 2, and 3 conversation. Here's a person operating fully out of what it looks like to see the world through the lens of option 3. Questions, comments, closing remarks? A song you'd like to sing? Nathan's song. You want to sing the song Nathan sang last week? No, you don't want that. There's a reason Megan turns my microphone off on Sundays, because it's inversely related to attendance. I have no idea. I don't know. He mentioned to Wesley hymn. I should have gotten the title of the hymn from. I can email him and ask him what hymn it was. And he said later it was a Wesley hymn, but the tune's different. If he'd sing the same tune, then we would know. But you'll find even in England, like we've changed the tunes to some of the older ones. So if you look in your hymnal, I know we use the screens in here. We look at the hymnal's nice because you can see who wrote the words and when. And then the tune oftentimes will be 100 years later. It's been reset to different music. Which is something that the contemporary music's doing now, taking old hymn word, because the words are so good, and putting it to new music, which is the tradition of the church for generations to do. So even if you go to England and sing with Methodists or even Anglicans that sing Wesley hymns, they'll do different tunes lots of times in strange ways. I say strange, it's different than what I know, right? Other questions? All right, let's pray. God, thank you for coffee and for those that love tea and for rest, for your word, for your work and your grace, for the invitation to be on the march towards a victory we glimpse in moments in the beauty, in the truth, and in love, May those moments multiply and expand. May we reflect them and give witness to them. May we, in word and deed, give witness to the truth revealed to us. May we be open to be people who are calm and not afraid. We may face the future as people who know who holds it. And we not always know what time it is, Lord, but we know that you are in time and outside of time and around us, and you carry us forward both into the future, and you hold and heal our past and our present. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank y'all. Have a great evening.